Something strange is happening inside the American workforce right now, and almost nobody is talking about it. Millions of workers are showing up every single day to jobs they hate, jobs that underpay them, jobs that have no future, and they are staying. Not because they love what they do, not because their boss is great, not because the pay is worth it. They are staying because they are terrified. Terrified of what happens the moment they leave, terrified of what is waiting for them on the other side. And economists have a name for what is unfolding right now across this country. They call it job hugging. And if you understand what it really means, it is one of the clearest warning signs that a recession is already knocking on America's door. Let's start with a number that should stop you cold: 57%. That is the share of American workers who now identify as job huggers, according to a February 2026 survey by Resume Builder. More than half the working population of the United States is clinging to a job not out of ambition, not out of loyalty, but out of pure fear. And this number is climbing fast. Just 6 months earlier, in August of 2025, that figure was 45%. In less than half a year, 12 more percentage points of the American workforce crossed over into fear mode. That is not a trend. That is a collapse in worker confidence happening in real time. To understand why this matters so much, you have to understand what healthy job markets look like. In a healthy economy, workers move. They quit jobs for better ones. They take risks. They negotiate. They leave if they are being underpaid or undervalued. That movement, economists call it the quits rate, is one of the most reliable indicators of economic confidence in the country. When the quits rate is high, workers feel powerful. They know they can land something better. But right now, the quits rate has fallen below pre-COVID levels. Workers are not quitting. Workers are not moving. Workers are frozen in place. And a frozen workforce is one of the clearest signals that the engine of the American economy is starting to stall. Here's what is driving the fear. 70% of self-identified job huggers say they are worried that artificial intelligence will affect their jobs within the next 6 months. 63% fear they will be laid off during that same window. These are not irrational fears. In 2025 alone, more than 1.2 million Americans lost their jobs, 58% more than the previous year, and the highest layoff rate since the COVID pandemic shutdowns of 2020. Amazon cut 16,000 employees in a single announcement. Microsoft eliminated entire divisions. Intel, one of the crown jewels of American technology, slashed its workforce at a scale not seen in the company's history. And these were not low-wage jobs. These were the white-collar, salaried, benefits included jobs that the American middle class was built on. So what do workers do when they see their colleagues being walked out the door? They go quiet. They stop asking for raises. They stop pushing back against bad management. They stop exploring opportunities. They put their heads down and they pray that their name does not show up on the next list. That is job hugging. And while it may look like stability on the surface, it is one of the most dangerous economic conditions an economy can develop, because the fear that creates it does not stay confined to the workplace. Think about what a job hugger does with their money. They do not spend freely. They do not take on new loans. They do not buy houses. They do not invest in their futures. They cut back. They hoard cash. They pay down debt instead of circulating money through the economy. And when millions of people simultaneously pull back from spending at the same moment, the economy does not glide. It contracts. Consumer spending makes up more than 2/3 of the United States economy. When Americans stop spending, companies stop growing. And when companies stop growing, they stop hiring. And when they stop hiring, the fear deepens further. This is the feedback loop of a recession, and job hugging is the first visible symptom. The numbers from early 2026 confirm that this feedback loop is already beginning to spin. The Federal Reserve's own consumer expectations data shows that the average American worker now believes they have roughly a 45% chance of securing a new job within 3 months if they were to leave their current position today. That number is lower than what workers reported at the height of the COVID pandemic in December of 2020. Let that sink in. American workers right now feel less confident about finding a new job than they did when the entire economy was shut down and people were being sent home by government order. That level of pessimism does not appear out of nowhere. It is the product of a job market that has been quietly deteriorating beneath the surface of a headline unemployment rate that does not tell the full story. And the full story is ugly. The Bureau of Labor Statistics revised its 2025 employment numbers in early 2026, and what they revealed shocked analysts. The economy had added 400,000 fewer jobs in 2025 than previously reported. The actual total for the entire year, was just 181,000 jobs. To put that in context, the American economy needs to add at minimum 150,000 jobs per month just to keep up with population growth. In 2025, the country added fewer jobs in 12 months than it should have added in a single month and a half. That is not a soft landing. That is a labor market on the edge of a cliff. Meanwhile, corporate bankruptcies reached their highest level since 2010, the immediate aftermath of the Great Recession. At least 717 companies filed for bankruptcy through November of 2025 alone. Spirit Airlines, Del Monte Foods, Rite Aid, names that were household words gone. And it is not just the big names. Across retail, restaurants, and small business, the stress fractures are appearing everywhere. Stores closing, franchises shutting down, owners who could not absorb the combination of high interest rates, elevated input costs, and consumers who were already cutting back. And consumers are cutting back. 88% of Americans reported feeling some form of financial stress entering 2026. That is not a minority. That is essentially the entire country. 54% cited high daily expenses as their number one source of stress. 46% said their income was simply not enough. 39% said they had no emergency fund to fall back on if they lost their income tomorrow. Think about that number for a moment. Nearly 4 in 10 working Americans are one missed paycheck away from financial crisis. And yet, they are stuck in jobs they cannot leave because the market outside is too dangerous to enter. This is the trap. This is what job hugging actually looks like from the inside. You are miserable where you are. You know you are underpaid. You know your company does not value you. But the outside world looks worse. The job listings are thin. The interviews take months. More than half of all job seekers in America right now are spending 6 months or longer searching before they receive a single offer. Reverse recruiters, people you hire to apply to jobs on your behalf, are charging $1,500 a month, and workers are paying it because the system has become so broken that even that seems worth a shot. And still, nothing. The labor market has entered what one major research firm called the Great Freeze, a period defined not by mass layoffs, not by explosions of unemployment, but by stillness. Stillness that is slowly suffocating economic growth from the inside. And here's the part that should frighten every single person watching this. The people who are the most trapped are not entry-level workers. They are not teenagers working part-time retail. The job huggers driving these statistics are mid-career professionals. Gen X workers in their 40s and 50s who have mortgages, children, aging parents, and retirement accounts that are already behind schedule. Gen Z workers in their 20s who entered the workforce during a pandemic, watched their student debt pile up, and are now being told by an AI-disrupted economy that the skills they trained for may be obsolete within 5 years. These are the people holding the American middle class together, and right now they are holding on for dear life. But the damage being done to this generation of workers runs deeper than most people realize. A Manpower Group report released in early 2026 documented something that should alarm every business leader and every policymaker in this country. Job huggers are not just staying in their roles, they are shutting down inside them, they are turning down stretch assignments, they are skipping internal job postings, they are declining training opportunities, they are refusing to raise their hand for anything that might expose them or make them visible, because visibility in a layoff environment feels like a target. The result is a workforce that is physically present and mentally absent. Companies are not running lean and efficient. They are running on the hollow energy of people who stopped caring but cannot afford to leave. And the productivity numbers are beginning to show it. This matters because productivity is the engine of long-term economic growth. When workers disengage en masse, when creativity declines, when innovation stalls, when the best ideas stop flowing because no one feels safe enough to share them, the economy does not just slow down in the short term. It loses its competitive edge over years and decades. Japan spent the 1990s watching exactly this play out. An entire generation of workers trapped in dying companies, unable to move, unable to grow, unable to contribute at full capacity. They called it the lost decade. And it was not just one decade. The stagnation stretched across 2. The United States is not Japan. But the early warning signs are uncomfortably familiar. There is another dimension to this crisis that almost nobody is discussing, and it concerns the youngest workers in the American economy. The unemployment rate for workers between the ages of 16 and 24 has been sitting above 10% and rising for 6 consecutive months. That is not a rounding error. That is a structural failure. Young people entering the workforce right now are not finding jobs. They are finding closed doors. And the ones who do find work are finding it in the narrow corridors that are still hiring. Healthcare, social assistance, and a handful of data-driven roles that require credentials most young Americans do not yet have. The college class of 2026 is walking into the weakest entry-level hiring expansion in years. Early projections of 7% growth in college hiring were revised sharply downward as employers reassessed their needs. What was supposed to be a promising start is turning into a brutal introduction to an economy that is not ready for them. And the workers who do lose their jobs right now are discovering something horrifying. They cannot get back in. The share of unemployed Americans who have been out of work for 6 months or more is now tied with the pre-2009 record. the record set in the immediate aftermath of the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. These are not lazy people. These are not people who are not trying. These are people firing off hundreds of applications into applicant tracking systems that filter them out before a human eye ever sees their resume. They are paying $1,500 a month to reverse recruiters just to get their applications in front of someone. They are spending 6 months, 9 months, a year in search, and still nothing. And every month they stay out, the gap on their resume grows. And every month that gap grows, the next employer looks at them a little more skeptically. This is how economic trauma compounds. This is how a bad year turns into a lost career. The Federal Reserve is watching all of this. The economists are watching. JP Morgan has already warned that job market growth in the first half of 2026 will be, in their words, uncomfortably slow. Unemployment is projected to peak at 4.5%, and that is the optimistic scenario, the one that assumes no new shocks, no new tariff escalation, no new banking stress. Wage growth, which had been running ahead of inflation for 2.5 years, is now decelerating. ZipRecruiter's research team warned in their 2026 forecast that wage growth is converging with inflation, and that when the two lines cross, real wages will begin to fall. Workers will technically be earning more dollars but buying less with each one. That is not recovery. That is the slow suffocation of household purchasing power dressed up in paycheck numbers that look fine on the surface. And the tariffs are not helping. Businesses cannot plan. They cannot commit to hiring cycles when the cost of their inputs can change overnight based on a policy announcement or a trade negotiation that falls apart. Senior economists have described the current employer environment with one word: paralysis. 40% of workers surveyed by Monster.com expect the job market to get worse in 2026. Another 40% expect it to stay exactly the same. That means 8 in 10 American workers have already abandoned hope for meaningful improvement this year. That level of mass resignation, not from jobs, but from optimism itself, is one of the most dangerous economic conditions a democracy can develop. Because when people stop believing the system can work for them, they stop participating in the ways that make the system work. They stop spending, they stop investing, they stop taking risks. And the economy, starved of that energy, begins to contract from within. There's one more thing you need to understand about what job hugging does to the companies these workers are staying in. Low turnover sounds like a good thing on paper. Stable workforce, lower recruiting costs, institutional knowledge preserved. But what is actually happening inside these organizations is the opposite of health. 94% of job huggers know they are making a trade-off. They know they are sacrificing career advancement. They know they are probably leaving money on the table. They know that staying is costing them something, and workers who feel trapped do not give their best. They give their minimum. They do what is necessary to avoid being noticed in the wrong way and nothing more. The result for companies is a slow rot, lower output, less innovation, higher frustration, increasing burnout that does not show up in the quarterly earnings call, but absolutely shows up in the 5-year competitive position of the business. And when the freeze eventually breaks, when the layoffs that have been held back finally come, when companies that have been running on disengaged workforces finally restructure, the shock to the unemployment numbers will be sudden and severe. This is the hidden danger of the Great Freeze. It does not bleed slowly, it holds pressure until the moment it cannot hold anymore, and then it releases all at once. The economists who study labor market dynamics call this a cliff effect. And the American economy right now is walking very carefully along the edge of exactly that cliff. The Federal Reserve is waiting. The administration is watching its tariff policy. The AI companies are continuing to automate. And in the middle of all of it, 160 million American workers are going to work every day, quietly terrified, quietly disengaged, quietly hoping that nothing changes. Because in an economy, this fragile change almost always means something getting worse. That is not an economy building toward growth. That is an economy holding its breath. And economies cannot hold their breath forever. Job hugging is not just a workplace phenomenon. It is not just an HR metric or a labor market data point. It is the sound of an entire nation's workforce bracing for impact. Pay attention to what is happening. The people around you who are staying silent, staying put, staying in jobs that are slowly grinding them down. They are not being cautious. They are telling you something about the state of this economy that no government report, no Wall Street forecast, and no headline unemployment number is willing to say out loud. The Great Freeze is here. And what comes after a freeze is never warmth. It is collapse.